as you can see from the slide deck, is going to look at the outline plans for the dedicated schools grant, as well as other grants as relates to the forthcoming 25-26 year accordingly. Okay, so before we get too much into the detail of the dedicated schools grant specifically, we'll just take a moment to look briefly at the grants that we are currently paying out as part of the current year for 24-25. Now, on these first few slides, I don't intend to list off every single grant and go into any great detail about it, but there are a couple that I'll pick out for specific reasons just to draw your attention to as we go along. So on this first slide, as I say, we've got the DSG, the pupil premium and universal infant free school meals. Also within 24-25, we have a number of grants relating to teachers' pay. The two I want to draw out from this slide just to speak in a bit more detail about firstly are the core schools budget grant and the early years budget grant, which are listed there. So these are new grants that we announced a couple of months ago. Payments haven't actually gone out as yet for these grants. So for core schools budget grants, we're looking to make payments to local authorities at the end of November and then at the beginning of December for academies. And likewise for the early years budget grant, again, payments should be with local authorities by the end of November. Now, although the allocations themselves haven't been paid, the guidance for these particular grants is published on gov.uk and is linked on the slide there. So we would just encourage attendees to review that guidance if they haven't already done so, just to familiarise themselves with that funding that is going to be paid imminently to yourselves. The other grant I would just like to quickly draw attention to on this same slide is the grant second from bottom there, which is the primary PE and sports premium. So for this particular grant for 24-25, we haven't as yet published the conditions of grant. We are expecting those imminently to be published. But nonetheless, within that link that's on the slide, there is guidance which relates to 24-25. And in particular, within that guidance, there is reference to arrangements for schools needing to spend their PE and sport premium grant fully within the 24-25 academic year that it's been allocated for. Now, the funding is provided to all pupils between years 1 and 6, and therefore shouldn't be allocated to only benefit one particular year group. But crucially, schools cannot carry forward any unused funding to the following academic year. The entirety of their funding must be spent by the 31st of July 2025, and that will be expected to be reflected in the end of year declaration that they complete using the digital form. Now, I appreciate obviously that message is crucial for schools, and we will be making sure that message is communicated directly to schools, but we're mentioning it here just if you're having conversations with schools directly about that particular grant, just to emphasise that point, because in previous years we have had different arrangements whereby schools could carry forward any unused funding in relation to that particular grant. So it is to make the point that for 24-25 that will no longer be the case. On this next slide, the only grant I'm going to quickly draw attention to is the Early Careers Framework funding. So we have two grants within the ECF funding that we pay out, which is the Mentor Backfill Grant and also the Time Off Timetable Grant. We are expecting those two grants to be paid again at the end of November to local authorities and at the beginning of December for academies. And that's an arrears payment which relates to the previous 23-24 academic year. So again, guidance is published on gov.uk for those two particular grants. And as I say, you should be expecting payments at the end of November accordingly for that particular funding. Now, again, before we move on to dedicated schools grant, we do just want to touch quickly on the future plans as relates to Teachers Pay Additional Grant, Teachers Pension Employer Contribution Grant, and Core Schools Budget Grant for 25-26. So the first thing to say is that for all three of those grants, as far as mainstream, primary and secondary maintained schools are concerned, all three of those grants will be incorporated into core funding from April of 2025. As is usually the case for academies, mainstream academies will see their funding incorporated into core funding from September of 2025 because of the differences in the counting years that they run to. So academies will still see one further grant payment that will cover them for the period April to August of 2025. But for all maintained mainstream schools, it will be incorporated into core funding. With the arrangements for special AP and hospital schools, currently, if you consult the Teachers Pay Additional Grant and Teachers Pension Employer Contribution Grant methodologies currently, what they simply say is that we will communicate arrangements for funding special AP and hospital schools for 25-26 in due course. Now, what we can say as part of this session is that the intention from April of 2025 onwards is to actually amalgamate all three of these grants into one single grant payment for local authorities, specifically for special AP and hospital schools. So Just to be absolutely clear again, as far as mainstream schools are concerned, it will be rolled into core funding. But for special AP and hospital schools, the intention, as I say, is to amalgamate all three of these grants into one single funding payment, which you'll receive from April of 2025 onwards. Now, the preparation of the work for that is ongoing, and we obviously will communicate more detail on that in due course, but it's just to give you a foresight into what the intentions are going forward as relates to those particular grants. If we move on now to the dedicated schools grant, so the plans for 25-26 will hopefully look very familiar on the slide there. There's no changes to the makeup of DSG. It will just be the standard 4 blocks that you're used to seeing in previous years: the schools block, the central school services block, the high needs block, and the early years block accordingly. Now, in terms of movement between blocks, again, much of the information is similar to previous years, so local authorities will continue to have flexibility to move funding between blocks. That will include transferring up to 0.5% of your schools block to another block with the approval of your schools forum. It will also include movement out of the early years block to any other block, so long as consultation with schools forum has taken place and any early years pass-through condition is also satisfied. Movement out of the high needs block to any other block is also allowed in consultation with the schools forum, with relevant representatives on the schools forum and providers likely to be affected by the transfer. And movement out of the central school services block to the schools block is allowed in consultation with the schools forum as well. We won't touch too much on this applications within this session. Back in July of this year, we did run an entire local authority workshop that covered the disapplications process in quite a bit of detail, setting out information such as how to complete the relevant pro forma, as well as information on how to shape your arguments and your rationale for requesting a disapplication. Now, that particular session was recorded and is available on YouTube, so for any attendees that did miss that session, there is an opportunity to go back and review it accordingly, so we would certainly encourage you to do that if you weren't able to attend back in July. And for that reason, as I say, we're not going to dive too much into the specifics on disapplications as part of this session, except for covering off the information that's on the slide we can see now. So that means crucial dates for disapplications for this year will be firstly the 18th of November, and that is the deadline to submit a disapplication for any movements out of the schools block that are exceeding that 0.5% figure that we mentioned previously, and also for any movements out of the schools block where you haven't secured schools forum approval, but as a local authority you still wish to proceed with making the request. Now, the significance of the 18th of November deadline is that by submitting a disapplication by that date, it does enable us sufficient time to ensure ministers can fully consider and provide a response to you before your APT deadline. We would also stress that if you are thinking about submitting a block movement request, if you can contact us before you make the request to discuss the details with us, that can help us discuss the rationale for why you want to make the disapplication and where possible help to strengthen any rationale that you are making before it goes up for consideration. Now, the department does recognise that there may be exceptional circumstances where a local authority needs to amend a disapplication request that it's already submitted. That can be, for example, as indicated on the slide, whereby perhaps demand for high needs provision has changed significantly or unexpectedly, or perhaps where final pupil numbers in the October census are significantly different from expected numbers. Now, in these circumstances, if you are looking to amend a disapplication request you've made, we would ask that you make that subsequent request to us by the 10th of January 2025 at the latest. As far as payment dates are concerned, again, there are very little that's changed in respect to last year. So payments will still be made in 13 instalments through the year with effectively 1 payment per month, with the exception of March, where 2 payments will be made. And again, chief financial officers within the local authority will also be required to sign a statement confirming that the DSG conditions grant were adhered to as part of that assurance process. As far as underspends are concerned, underspends can be carried forward to the next financial year, but with the caveat that it can only be spent on the school's budget. Your school's forum should be consulted on any use of underspend, and the forum consent is required where it is to be used for central budgets. On the next slide, as far as deficits is concerned, so for deficits, the options for carry forward are set out accordingly, which include carrying forward all of the deficit against the school's budget in the next financial year, carrying forward part of the deficit forward against the school's budget in the next financial year, and then carrying forward the rest to the following financial year, or carrying all of the deficit forward for the following financial year. Now, if the local authority wishes to fund any part of the deficit from a source other than the DSG, then as an authority you need to apply to the Secretary of State under the regulations for authorisation to disregard the requirement in Schedule 2 relating to deficits accordingly. Now, if any part of a deficit is carried forward to the next financial year it is the DSG that in the year that must eliminate that part of the deficit. Conversely, any part of the deficit carried forward to the following year will need to be recovered from the DSG it receives in that year. And Secretary of State consent is mandatory where a local authority wishes to either use general funds to recover the DSG deficit or add general funds to its school's budget accordingly. Now, as far as allocations are concerned for 25-26, we are expecting those to be available as soon as possible this autumn term. The schools block will be allocated using primary and secondary units of funding, which will be published as soon as possible after the 30th of October budget, and those will be multiplied by the number of pupils recorded on the October 2024 census. For high needs allocations, again, these will be allocated as calculated utilising the high needs national funding formula, which will be published again after the October budget as soon as possible, with the basic entitlement factor updated to incorporate high needs pupil numbers confirmed in the October 2024 census again. As far as the CSSB block is concerned, so the unit of funding for ongoing commitments will be published as soon as possible following the October budget, and that will be multiplied by the same pupil numbers from the October 24 census as used for the schools block. Now, for historic commitments funding, we will apply protection to ensure historic commitments cannot fall below the total value of ongoing termination of employment and prudential borrowing costs. If, as a local authority, you're in this position, there is a mailbox there. You can contact us for further details and advice about that accordingly. For the early years block, as we can see there, we are expecting to publish provisional allocations in December of 2024. Now, further guidance to supplement the various block allocations of information in these slides will be included in the Schools and High Needs Operational Guide for 25-26, and once again, we are expecting those to be published as soon as possible. What now follows on for the remaining of these slides just gives some breakdowns of expected timelines for updates for the 25-26 allocations. Essentially, these will affect things like any academy conversions that take place during the year, as well as any updates to the data we use to calculate individual block allocations. We also have a summary of payment dates for various grants that we discussed at the start of the presentation, and we'll cover off some of the key payment milestones for those grants as well in the last few slides of this slide deck. But as you can see on the screen there, for March 2025, the schools block and high needs block will be updated for academy conversions after November 2024. For spring 2025, high needs block will be updated to reflect any new cross-border data for import-export adjustments. And in July 25, the schools block and high needs block will be updated for academy conversions after March of 2025, and the early years block will be updated with the latest census data. Continuing on from that, on the next slide, as you can see, we have further milestones for academy conversions that take place during the year. And crucially, we culminate with, in July 2026, a final update to the early years block, which again incorporates the latest census data we have at that particular point in time. Now, as we've already mentioned, for the dedicated schools grant for next year, we're expecting 13 instalments paid out as part of the conditions grant, as is the case this year. For this year, pupil premium will be paid in 4 instalments, which are June, September, December, and then March of next year. For universal infant free school meals, the previous payment was made in June of 2024 of this year. There will be a further payment made next summer in June of 2025, which will be the reconciliatory payment. For PE and sport premium, we had a payment in April of 2024, which was the final payment as part of the 23-24 year. Later this month, you'll see the first payment that's made as part of the 24-25 year accordingly. As far as the core schools budget grant is concerned, as I've already mentioned, you can expect payments at the end of November for local authorities. There will be a further payment made in February of 2025, which will incorporate allocations for new and growing schools. And then finally, allocations are updated again in March of 2025, and that is to reflect the arrangements for special and alternative provision schools' updated place data. For early years budget grant, it's a little bit more simple. It is simply one single payment that you'll receive at the end of November, direct to local authorities for that particular grant. And similarly for both teachers' pension employer contribution grant and also for teachers' pay additional grant, which is on the next slide, again, the payment arrangements are somewhat similar to core schools budget grant. So for teachers' pension, you'll receive a payment at the end of this month for that particular grant. And then once again, in February of next year, there'll be an updated payment for new and growing schools and a final update for special schools made in March of 2025, again reflecting updated place data. And as we can see on the next slide, that's very much the case for teachers' pay as well, with those new and growing schools payments in February and updated place data for special schools feeding into a March allocation in 2025. As we mentioned, early years careers framework grants will be paid at the end of this month, and that is an arrears payment for 23-24 accordingly. And we've also got obviously detail there on the senior mental health leads training, which will be paid on a quarterly basis from June 24, September 24, December 24, and March 25. And there's also information on there about the difference for academy payments as well.